The following production is produced by the State University of New York College at Oneonta.
Good evening and welcome to another edition of Inside Red Dragon Sports. I'm your host, Geoff Hassard, the Assistant Director of Athletics and Sports Information Director here at SUNY Oneonta. And tonight I'm going to be joined by a special guest, Don Fewelling, who spent nearly 40 years at the college as a coach and a teacher. So please join me after the break, where I'll be joined in studio by Don Fewelling.
WUOW 104.7 FM is the region's premier radio station, offering award-winning programming from National Public Radio and Pacifica Radio networks, giving you the chance to become more informed about the arts, information, and entertainment from around the country and around the world. WUOW is your community radio station. Join us and support the sound.
Welcome back. Joining me now, longtime coach and physical education instructor, Don Fewelling. Welcome to the show, Don.
Thanks for having me, Geoff. I appreciate being here.
Of course, you retired a few years ago. Retirement must be treating you well. You look good.
Well, as they say, when you retire, you're busier than when you were working. So
well,
there's a lot of truth in that.
Yeah, well, of course, you're very busy. Antiques is your thing. Maybe we could start there. How does that go for you? I mean, you've got quite a baseball memorabilia collection.
Oh, yeah. Well,
maybe allude and tell us a little bit about some of the things that you're in possession of.
Well, I've always been a sports nut, as everybody knows. So when my kids were growing up, we were very fortunate in the early 70s to go back and find out where some of my stuff was when I was a kid growing up. And that kind of got things going with them because they were all baseball players when they were growing up. And so we started collecting baseball cards, and that became kind of like a real good thing for me to do because I was spending 20 hours a day up here, and that gave me a good outlet to start a collection, of course, being so close to Cooperstown and so forth. And so it's something that's just grown over the years to where now I'm really kind of a baseball historian, so to speak, and especially on pre-1900 stuff. So that's where my real expertise lies, is going back that far with baseball, and the history of baseball.
Now, what can you maybe just a couple of things that are of value in your collection that people might find interesting?
Well, if I give you the key ones there, my house might have some visitors over the wintertime, but I had dinner with Jackie Robinson August 8th, 1952, and throughout the years I stayed in touch with him a little bit, and I do have one of the gloves that he used when he was with the Kansas City Monarchs in the old Negro Leagues.
Wow.
And so that probably is my favorite piece that I have, and that stays under lock and key, and I just look at it lovingly once in a great while, but that's one of the pieces that I own. I have some other nice pieces, but that's one that has a lot of meaning to me.
Wow. Certainly that must be. And now you travel around. Now when you travel around now, the antiquing, what kinds of things are you involved in? I mean, is it baseball stuff, or is it just antiques in general?
Well, our shop, of course, is in Colliersville, and we have 18 rooms full of all types of stuff. And we buy out houses, so if somebody's going to move or something like that, or something happens through some misfortune and so forth, we go in sometimes and buy the entire house out. And we do lots of shows around the country. We're getting ready to do a show in Charlotte here in December, and so that means buying the big trucks and all the stuff that you gotta use for that stuff. So it's been something that we were doing before I retired. And as I tell people who are getting ready to retire, have something that you can go into versus trying to find something when you get to that age. Right. And we had something that we went right into, and my wife and I both enjoy it. And there's a lot of history involved. Just yesterday we were in Charlottesville, New York, which I knew never existed around this place, to go through a cemetery and find some things that we found some people's names, and so we're putting histories together and so forth. So it's a lot of fun, and I've always been a history buff anyway. It goes right along with kind of the baseball going back, and sports and so forth. So it all kind of ties in together and gives us something to do.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about your history in sports. You went to Cortland.
Oh, yeah.
You played baseball.
baseball, basketball, and soccer.
Okay, and those really were the big three sports back then. Of course, we on another show we had Al Sosa, and he was a wrestler at Cortland.
Well, he was a
and
very good wrestler
yeah,
at Cortland.
Four-time SUNY champion.
You got it. He's an excellent wrestler.
When they didn't have an opportunity to go to the national tournament, so it was unfortunate for him. But how'd you find your way to Oneonta?
Well, graduated from there, went and got a master's out in Indiana, came back and taught in high school in Minders Academy, and my old college basketball coach called me up while I was coaching high school. And I was coaching the basketball team there. And in one of his classes, when I took a class from him, he had us write down some things that we wanted to do in our lives. And I basically wrote down, "I want your job," who was my coach. And 2 years later, he called me back and said, "I've got a job for you." And so we were very happy where we were in high school. I had a very good team, and I had a lot of kids back, a couple 6'8", which were unheard of at that time. And he called me and said, "I've got a job for you. Do you want to come back?" And my first reaction was yes, because it means a lot to go back and coach at your alma mater. And so I went back, and unfortunately I coached some of the kids that I played with, so that was an interesting situation. But that's how I finally came to Oneonta. Hal Chase, who the building is named after, and Whitney Pete Corey, were very good friends when they both were at Cortland in the early 40s. And so there was a relationship between Dr. Chase and Dr. Corey. And so Dr. Chase went over and said, "Hey, I'm looking for a coach. I want him to come over and coach baseball, help with soccer, and help with basketball." Well, there I was at Cortland coaching soccer, basketball, and baseball, coaching all three of those sports. So he came and talked with me while I was just finishing a class at Cortland and said, "I've got a job for you, such and such and such and such, and it's going to pay you this much money." Well, that was at that time, about $3,000 more than I was making at Cortland. And my wife and I had just had a son, and so we thought it would be a good opportunity. As much as I hated to leave Cortland, because that's where my love really was, but coming over here in the fall of 1967 to help Garth with soccer, to take the freshman baseball team, we had freshman sports back then, to be the freshman baseball coach, and also to be the assistant varsity basketball coach, and it was a decision I'll never regret.
Now, you worked with Dr. Chase, and of course he's in our Hall of Fame, and like you said, a building is named after him, and of course he hired Al as well. I mean, he was the director of athletics, and we were very successful. The 60s, kind of a crazy time to come here, but of course the staff that was hired at that time, I mean, there was Jim Baker, Don Axtell, John Hurley, Carol Blazina. I mean, some of these, they're all still, they associated with the college for more than 35, 40 years. First question I like to ask is, why do you think people stayed that long?
Well, number one, Hal had an infectious enthusiasm about what he was doing. So you were working for a boss who didn't take it as something beneath him to go out and pick up a broom and sweep the gym during a halftime of a basketball game or go clean the wrestling mat off. You knew that he would do anything that he was asking you to do. That was number one. Number two, we were all young. When we came here, we were all in our mid-20s. And so we all kind of had a bond with each other a little bit. We socialized a little bit together and did a lot of things together. And next thing you know, the years had gone by, we were all physical education instructors, assistant professors or whatever. We all got tenure. We all coached at least 2 sports. And next thing you know, 10 years goes by, 15 years goes by, and Hal had a habit of keeping us all here. I mean, there were tough times as well as good times, but Hal had the kind of personality that when he kind of knew when you were having a problem, and he could do things to alleviate those situations before you even knew that you had the problem. He was an excellent guy to work for, and always had in mind the students, and told us that, hey, your livelihood is these students. Don't do anything to screw that livelihood up. And so he was just a good man to work for, and I think that had a lot to do with why we all stayed.
So loyalty.
Absolutely.
You started off, as you said, coaching a few sports for us. Now you moved into, after Hal Chase gave up his duties as the basketball coach, you became our basketball coach. Let's talk a little bit about those years. We went to the national championship game for the college division in 1977.
That's correct.
And that team we inducted into our Athletic Hall of Fame last year. it was great to see them all. I mean, I think we got everyone back, right? I mean,
I think we had like 11 of 11 of 15.
Yeah, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And they're all doing great.
Yep.
And you know, unfortunately, we
lost one this summer.
But overall, they were a lively bunch.
Oh yes.
Excited to be here. What was it like to recruit during that kind of late 60s, early 70s, and then kind of coach those kinds of athletes?
Well, it was interesting. I was on the road all the time. We didn't really have a lot of money to do it, but I knew if we were going to have good teams, you got to get good players. Very simple. You know, good players usually gives you good teams. So I would finish practice a lot of times from 2 to 4, and I'll just reiterate a little bit here about that. When I first came here, Hal was already talking about a new facility. The facility, which now is Chase Gym, was built in 1958 and 59. And when I came here in 67, Hal already had the blueprints and everything done for the new field house. And that was another thing that kept a lot of us here. The idea that, you know, in the late 60s and early 70s, we were going to have a great facility.
Yeah.
And when the state budgets cut through and so forth, and there were some problems on the campus, as everybody knew in the late 60s, and of course it's before your time, Geoff.
Right.
But there were problems on campuses, and a lot of the political people around didn't think that was the right thing to do. So in short, we lost our building. And when Hal knew that building was going to be lost, he knew that was going to present certain problems for all of us, because he had already hired a staff to go into that building.
Right.
And now all of a sudden, no building. So a lot of times teams would practice at 10 to 12 at night, you know, because we had all these coaches now with gymnastics and all the rest of them, and now where do you practice? Well, you got one gymnasium. And when that gym was built in 58, 59, that was really a decent high school facility. Now, we get back to the recruiting aspect of it. When I started recruiting, a lot of times I'd bring people on this campus, wouldn't show them the gym unless they asked to see it, because in many times their high school gym was better than ours. But you know, through a lot of persistence and going to the city, I got to know the city, New York City, probably better than I did the city of Oneonta, and was probably at times the only white person in a lot of the crowds down there in the late 60s. But I had a bright red blazer that I wore with red patent leather shoes. And so the blacks down there always knew, don't bother him, he's a basketball coach. They knew just from my attire. And so I had a lot of interesting times down there recruiting kids like Steve Blackman and Jackie Dalton, and going into the Catholic leagues in the city and coming out with Kevin Crotiers and Conroys and guys like that. And but when I took over the program, the varsity coach, I told Hal Chase, I said, give me 5 years and I'll have a national caliber team. Give me 5 years. Well, it took 6 to get him to the final game. But we were putting that team together piece by piece, and there was a lot of interesting times recruiting, a lot of nights that I slept in my car on behind diners in Long Island because it didn't have the money for the motel or whatever. We had no recruiting budget, 0 recruiting budget, and our basketball budget during the time was 6 X10L basketballs. That's it. That was our budget. And that came out of state funds. So there really wasn't anything. I didn't have a telephone in the office. There's another story about how I acquired a telephone in there, like Al talking about his boa constrictor story. Right. Some of these stories come out now, you know, I hope they don't come and cuff me.
Yeah.
But we put the teams together. We got great athletes. I always tried to recruit athletes that I thought were Division I caliber. I'd rather miss on a Division I caliber than to get a Division III kid who maybe couldn't cut the mustard.
Right.
So I always over-recruited, and thus we had a lot of kids that probably could have played a lot of places.
Now, we did have you had a great run all the way up until 1989 was your last men's basketball season?
89-90.
Then you were asked to coach our softball team. And all you did there was never have a losing season. We won 2 SUNY championships. Same philosophy?
Absolutely. You've got to have players. And of course, anytime you're talking baseball or softball, you're talking about pitching being the #1 thing. And having played a lot of fast pitch softball myself, I always loved the game. Of course, it was a baseball, you know, kind of a baseball thing. And when I took that over, the first year I took it over, all the players that were there knew I was coming in from being the basketball coach, so of course none of them wanted to come out. And they knew there was going to be some changes made, and we brought in a young lady named Bonnie Bush, and she was very interesting, but she could throw. And once we had a pitcher, then we could start to fill in the spots, and my primary recruiting things was to bring quality pitchers in. And once you get quality pitchers in women's softball, things are going. And then we took a trip to Australia in the mid-90s. Went over there and learned a lot of things about softball over in Australia. And gradually the program came together. And I believe at one time we had the third best winning percentage, I think, during a 10-year span of any division, college division program.
I mean, it was automatic. I mean, people just knew we were going to win 20 to 25 games every year for softball, which prior to that, some people might, we didn't have a field to play on. We didn't have a facility. I mean, for years, even when I first got here, we were downtown at the city field, and we're trying to scramble and play games.
Well, we hit the Kmart parking lot a lot. I brought them out to the golf course where I hit fly balls in the snow to them before we took our southern trips. We did what we had to do to be successful, and we didn't let the fact that we did not have a facility say, hey, well, we can't do it because we haven't got that. And we did basically the same thing with basketball for years. When they'd have a gymnastics meet in there, I had many times held a basketball practice in a classroom. We took all the chairs, put them out, and we would walk through and do certain things, and teach certain principles and so forth right in the classroom. You just had to do what you had to do.
Right. Now, fortunately for you, you got to see us play softball on the campus. Actually, that first year that we were on campus, we won the SUNY tournament, and we hosted.
Well, I never lost a game on that field.
Yeah, that was amazing.
No, we never lost that one year up there.
And from that point, what was it like? Obviously, coaching men and coaching women can be totally different. I think, because I've coached, both girls and boys, men and women. I don't know I think if you have athletes, I don't think there's a huge difference because they're both committed.
You're absolutely correct.
They want to play, they want to practice.
They want to win.
But what other kinds of, I guess you say, problems did you encounter that you weren't equipped maybe to handle going from men, because you had always coached men, to taking over our softball program?
I actually didn't find a whole lot different, as you pointed out. If you get good athletes, they're competitors, okay, and they want to win, so they're willing to put up with almost anything coaches, the stupid things that sometimes we do as coaches,
right?
Because they understand the total picture. When you have Liz McGrails and people like that, there's really nothing you're going to do as a coach to phase them. The thing probably that was the different thing with guys and girls is when there is a problem on a team, at least this is what I found with girls, they wanted to come in and talk about it. They wanted to come in and get it off their chest and talk about it and so forth. Guys will keep things inside a lot longer. So a lot of times in a practice, you can see things maybe coming up with guys in a sport like basketball that, something's going on, where the girls, what's going on. Because they're going to let you know, this is not right, this is not right, you treated her wrong here, you shouldn't have done this type of thing. And so you kind of took that all in, and then made your decisions, sometimes based on some of the knowledge that you got that maybe with the guys you never would have got. But as far as commitment, as far as toughness, as far as willingness to sacrifice, which we always talked about, there's a big difference between the great athlete and the so-so athlete. And I always pointed out that the very simple thing was this: great athletes love their sport, and they're willing to sacrifice for it. So there's a love there, a real love. When someone doesn't love something or someone or a sport, they'll look for ways to get away from it or out of it when things get tough. But when you got athletes that really love what they're doing, then they'll sacrifice. And they understand what the sacrifice might be. Maybe I can't play this game. Maybe somebody's got to play in my spot for this, whatever it is. But they're not going to walk away on you.
Right.
Whereas the non-committed athlete will find a way to get out the back door if they can when things go tough.
Yeah. Some of the top basketball players, a group of them are in the Hall of Fame as well. We've inducted many softball players and basketball players. Who are some of the top players, or maybe a player that you thought was an outstanding individual that maybe wasn't like an all-star or something like that in basketball? Let's talk basketball.
Well, basketball, we go back to the real good club, and of course anytime you play for the national title, you got some real good athletes on there. The interesting thing about that is that none of those athletes on that team were ever first team All-SUNY, which was interesting. So that tells you what they were as a team.
Right.
But Kevin Crotier, when we recruited Kevin, who was a point guard from 73 to I believe 77, I knew there we had the ingredients. We had someone that had the intelligence, the smarts, and the toughness to be a leader of that particular group. And then we had a kid named Stephen Blackman, who was an All-American for us, who was just an unbelievable talent. And unfortunately, he passed on us in 1991, but he was had made his mark outside of basketball too. He was a millionaire working at IBM and so forth. But he was people would come to the gym just to watch him practice. I mean, he was that good. He was very physical, very strong, but quicker than quick. And so and another kid that was on those clubs was a kid named Jackie Dalton, who was also in the Hall of Fame. And just a very smart 6'2" kid around the basket that would pump you 6 times before you finally get you off his feet and then go to the foul line and make his free throws. Those kids were just quality athletes, so my job with them was to just put them in situations where they were going to be successful because the talent was there,
right.
You know, and they became very successful, and all of them have gone on to have quite a bit of success after basketball. I'm trying to think of an athlete that I had I had a kid named Louis Nira who played for us in the mid-'80s,
yeah.
And he was a 6'1", out of position, middle, played under the basket type of thing, and had, when I recruited him, he was just a tough kid, and out of Owego, and he was the type of kid that after we played a ball game, we'd have to carry him on the bus and ice his knees down, so by the time if we had a 4-hour trip to get home, they could even walk again.
Wow.
And if we had a game the next night, he was ready to play. So we always had to carry extra ice in the bus for him because he had 2 bad knees and played 4 years, got 1,000 points and 1,000 rebounds.
Wow.
You know, against players that were much, much taller and bigger than him. But he had this uncanny will to get the job done, and our team was quite successful with him in there. And, you know, but we knew after the game we were going to have to carry him wherever he had to go. But
Right.
when the bell rang, he was ready to go.
Wow. Softball, who were some of the...
Well, softball. Well, you start with Bonnie Bush. You know, you go with Michelle Small, who's also in our Hall of Fame, was a great pitcher, great athlete. We had a young lady named Renee Thayer who came along in '93 and played till '96, and she was kind of the interim between Bonnie and Michelle and Allison Weller.
Right.
And she was also a tremendous pitcher, had a great changeup, came off a state championship team down in Afton. And of course, Allison Weller, who just went in the Hall of Fame, but probably the toughest kid that I probably coached, and when I look at all of the kids I had, probably there was a young lady named Missy Labar, who came out of Susquehanna Valley, was 4-time state champion, and all of her teammates wound up going Division I. And when I saw her play for 2 years, I said, she's the player I want. I didn't care about the other kids that were all D1 talent. She was a D1 talent. And we brought her here, and she gave us 4 great years, but she was a tough little sucker, you know. She was the heart and the soul and the guts of that team. She was a great second baseman, but we moved her to shortstop, which was a new position for her. But she was the leader on and off the field. She could also pitch, but she was tough. And she was tough on the players. So I became the good guy, you know, while she was here, because if anybody screwed up, they had to go through her first. And then I would go over and console the player and say, well, now Missy didn't mean all that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But she was the heart and soul of 3 or 4 real quality teams we had because of her toughness.
Now, you had an opportunity to also coach Liz McGrail, who probably is probably the greatest pure athlete, female, that we've ever
Well,
had
I
here
stated
in Oneonta.
when she went in the Hall of Fame, Geoff, that not only was she the best female athlete that I had seen here, she might be the best athlete, male or female, that we've had here, because she was on 3 NCAA teams.
Yeah.
I don't know, she had 6 or 7 or 8, I don't know how many awards for that. She was just a tremendous all-around athlete. And when you talk about an athlete, there are a lot of great athletes out there who can't play soccer, who can't do things with their feet.
Yeah.
They can catch, they can throw, they can do all those things, but now you take her, basketball player, shoot, whatever, now you take somebody and put the soccer ball at their feet and they go, huh, what am I going to do with this?
Yeah.
So she talked about, when you talk about Elizabeth Grail, you talk about someone who has all the skills, catching, throwing, the basketball skills, the jumping, the speed, the agility, and now you put that with the soccer ball. There's not many great athletes that have played soccer, basketball, quote, baseball, not many.
Yeah.
And so she was really, really exceptional.
Yeah. Now in her
And
team-
easy to coach, very easy to coach.
Yeah, because she would just do it.
Yeah, well, and she never said anything.
Right.
Either.
She would just, okay, this is it, the game time, and we're ready to go.
You got it.
Which is, like you said, you get those kind of athletes and
Yep.
you let them play.
You got it. You try not to screw them up.
Yeah. Your association with Bob Knight,
Mm-hmm.
we were talking before we went on the air tonight. Could you just maybe
Yeah.
talk a little bit about maybe his influence on you
Yeah.
as a basketball
Well,
coach?
of course, Bobby Knight had a fabulous career, as we all know, and he used to be a tremendous clinician. And of course, as coaches, we would all go to clinics and listen to these guys come in and talk about their philosophy and how they taught things and so forth. And Knight was one of these guys that would come into clinics, and he would actually tell you what he was doing, where some guys were kind of not too concerned about telling you what they're really doing.
Yeah.
They're putting on a show. Knight was very straightforward. This is how we teach our defense. Everything with him was defense first and so forth. But Bobby Knight goes back to Oneonta State a long, long time ago. And here's another quick story for those people out here. When Ed Kassler was coaching basketball, whom I was an assistant to in the 60s, Ed Kassler played at Long Island University. Okay, and he played for a very, very legendary coach down there, who the name escapes me right now, but he's one of the legends. And Bobby Knight was a young coach at West Point in the 60s. And he always went to this particular legend to learn about what he was going to do. So there was a tie in there between Ed Kassler, Bobby Knight, and this legendary coach that Ed played for at LIU. And one night, Bobby Knight came to our sports banquet here in 1967 or 68, but not as a speaker. He just came because this other coach was coming to speak. So Bobby Knight came to Oneonta in the mid to late 60s. So from there, I got to know him because at the time I was an assistant, and so I immediately wanted to know what he was doing at West Point. He invited me down there. I went down a couple times while he was running practices at West Point, which was very interesting during the Vietnam War.
Oh, geez.
Okay, but there's a lot of stories that could go on from down at West Point. Anyway, make a long story short, in 1985, 86, or 84, 85, I'm not sure, I took a sabbatical from here, and I went to Cornell to work in their basketball program. And a gentleman by the name of Tom Miller was the head coach at Cornell at the time, and he played for Bobby Knight at West Point.
Oh, geez.
So he had some very interesting stories, when Knight was a very young coach in his 20s. So through Tom, I reacquainted myself with Bobby in the mid-'80s. And so when we go to the NCAA tournament and so forth, or the conventions and so forth at the end of the year, why Miller would always stay with Knight. And of course, I tagged along with Miller, so there was the bond there. And then I was invited to Knight's house and so forth. And he is really, I say this without any thoughts, he is the smartest person I've ever been around in terms of knowing history, military history. You want to know something about fishing and hunting or whatever, and he's a very funny guy. He doesn't show it a lot on the TVs, but he's got a sense of humor that will go along with all of that. So that's how that has come about. And my wife has a picture, my wife being from Indiana, has a picture of Bobby on her bureau. She doesn't have one of me, by the way,
Yeah.
but there is a big one of her and Bobby together. And one more quick story, how he's thought about at Indiana. My father-in-law and I, who we got along well, I was the only one in the family. All the rest were sons, so I took the daughter and moved her 1,000 miles away right away. So I wasn't, high on the list of people in the family. But one time he called when Knight was having problems in the late 90s at Indiana. He called, and usually he called, wants to talk to his daughter. Doesn't want to talk to his son-in-law, wants to talk to his daughter. That night, I handed the phone to her as soon as I knew who it was. And after a minute, she says, he wants to talk to you. And I go, okay. So first thing he says is, Knight leaving. And that was when Knight was having problems with Miles Brand, who just passed, by the way, here.
Yeah.
He was having problems and so forth. But he was very concerned. This is an 85-year-old man, very concerned that Knight was going to leave Indiana and take another job. So he knew that I thought, he thought that I would know exactly everything was going on the inside because of my relationship with Knight, which of course I didn't know.
Yeah. Now, did you use Bobby Knight? Did you play the helping man-to-man defense?
We sure did.
And the motion offense, which was pretty much that's his signature.
Yeah, sure is. We adapted to it. We didn't run all of it, but the man-to-man philosophies we did. We ran primarily man-to-man most of the time. Help side defense, on the ball defense, the whole bit. And the motion is something that is different to teach because you're not teaching specific things, you're teaching generalities.
Yes.
And that gives the players the idea I can do this, this, or this. And I used to run an offense where everything was planned, it was just executed.
Yeah.
And so that was a change for me to give the players more freedom on offense. but we still kept what I thought was the good defensive philosophy, where everybody knew what was going on the ball and off the ball. And gradually over the years, I let the players kind of offensively do more things.
Right. I mean, I think you get back to you recruit those players who are good athletes and they kind of know the game and they know where to go.
Yeah.
So because they understand the game better, and of course today's players, a lot of them understand even more because they're watching it more and playing it more. And
well, his philosophy also was and mine was also, I didn't recruit many junior college kids. We brought kids in as freshmen. We had an excellent freshman program. We let them play there. I wanted the best 8 players there and the best 8 players on the varsity, so we had the best 16 players playing basketball. And then when they all became varsity players, they had more experience, and our seniors meant a lot to us because the seniors were also the teachers of our system. So a lot of players knew that if they stayed in our program for 4 years, they were going to play. They might not play as sophomores, but they were going to play as juniors and seniors because then they were going to help us teach the philosophy of what we were trying to teach to the freshmen and sophomores. And that's Knight's philosophy. It's the same. You don't turn anybody over. You keep them in the program.
Right.
And, of course, a lot of those kids have gone on to become coaches.
Right. You had a long career here, taught in the physical education program. You've coached alongside and you've been alongside many of the outstanding staff, administrators at this college. Overall, your experience at Oneonta?
I wouldn't trade it for anything. And I've told a lot of people around the area here and so forth that I was fortunate enough to be successful enough to have opportunities, that were presented to me. And we always looked here at Oneonta. Our 3 kids were raised here. The Baseball Hall of Fame being close had a lot to do with a lot of things. And but working for the state here, it's been a wonderful situation, and nothing's perfect. Nothing's perfect. But all in all, I'd say it was a real good move on my part to come here and to stay here, to teach here. I've made a lot of friends here. And here I am 10 years. I'm going to be retired 10 years this December, and I'm still around. I'm still above the grass, as we say. So, here we are.
And we're glad you are, and we're glad you came by today and took time out of your busy antiquing schedule to come by and spend time with us. And
Geoff,
certainly
appreciate it.
Loved talking to you. So, well, I'd like to thank Don Fewelling for coming by today and sharing some wonderful stories about his career here at Oneonta. And again, we'd like to remind you that for any information about Oneonta State Athletics, please check out our website and our hotline. Thanks again for joining me tonight, and we'll see you next time on Inside Red Dragon Sports.